In this part, we look at culture. This is a key part of an organization, but also a key part of the leader's role to develop the right type of culture for that organization. So organizational culture refers to the way things are done in the organization. It's very difficult to describe sometimes an organization's culture. You've got to be in that organization to kind of feel what the culture is like. From an SBL point of view, obviously you would not be in the situation where you would be feeling an organization's culture, so you'd need to read up about that, and that would be part of the information you were provided, and you might need to analyze the culture within the organization by reading up on what's actually happening. So culture includes formal aspects, so policies and terminology, so that kind of is all part of that kind of cultural feel, but also includes informal, so less visible, so beliefs and values. So there's a combination of things here, formal and informal, which is combining to develop an organization's culture. One way of thinking about it is the mnemonic VAIN. So VAIN stands for values. So what are the values in the organization? The attitudes. So again, what's the attitude maybe from the top of the organization and the leaders, but also as a company? What are the norms? So what are the kind of routines and the normal way of operating, the normal operations within the business? And what are the expectations? What are we looking to achieve? What are individuals and the company looking to achieve? So these are headings really that then you could explore in order to try to give you an assessment of the culture. So you could use those 4 headings to kind of find out what the values are, what the attitudes are, norms and expectations. Now you'd have to have some evidence within each of those, but once you're able to do that, you could kind of come up with an overall assessment of the culture. So some of the influences on culture would be national. So national is the country. So if you work in the UK, the culture of the UK would influence, how things work in the UK would influence the culture of the organization. Similarly, if you worked in other parts of the world, that could have an influence on how that company operates. The founders. So again, this depends on how recent the company was founded, but the original people that founded that organization will have an influence. Maybe if it was founded recently and they're still actively involved, their influence will be greater than if an organization was founded many, many years ago, and therefore the founders have long since departed, but they still may have an impact on how things are done. The history. So again, over a period of time, are they a startup business? Are they a global business? Are they a business that is across many different countries? What's the history? How's it got there? Is it a company that's organically grown? Is it a company that has grown by acquisition? So there's lots of different parts to the group. That will have an influence on the overall culture. The structure. So again, this will influence. So if you think in simple terms, you could have a very flat structure whereby there's not many supervisory type roles within the organization, or you might have a very hierarchical structure where there is lots of supervision. So if you think of someone like the army or the police, they are very hierarchical in their structure, and therefore that influences the culture within those organizations. Whereas you may go to a technology company like Google, for example, or Apple, which has a flatter structure, and therefore the culture feels differently. And the leadership style. So we were talking obviously about leadership in this lesson 1, but that style of leadership will have an influence on the overall culture too. So a couple of different types of leaderships here, leaders here, sorry. Transactional leaders. So these view relationships in the organization as transactions. So in a sense, the example here is that you have employees in the organization. They have a contract of employment to give their time in order to work for that organization, and that organization then pays them a salary for the work that they do. So that's a very transactional view, and therefore a transactional leader views things very much in that way. Similarly with customers, suppliers, etc., it's all very transactional in nature. This type of leader normally fits into a culture and does not look to change or improve it. So they kind of just align with the existing culture and don't change it. However, the opposite, in a sense, is a transformational leader. So this is where they view their role in the organization as being to inspire and motivate others. Transformational change, in a sense. This leader, therefore, influences and changes culture. So they are not transactional. Okay, they are very much transformational, and therefore a different style of leader. Both leadership styles can work in organizations, so it's not one is better than the other, and sometimes actually transactional is more appropriate at a certain point in time. But probably over time, over a longer period of time, a transformational leadership style may be better, especially when a company is looking to change and grow. Having that kind of transformational leader at the top would be beneficial. It does say there this style is particularly important in a very dynamic business environment where things are changing. So one of the tools that we can use to assess culture is something called the cultural web. So this is a tool, and you'll see in SBL there are many different tools or frameworks or models, for want of different words, that you can use, and it provides you with a structured approach to do something. So in this case, if you wanted to analyze the culture in an organization, you could use the model, the cultural web, because it would give you a structure on how to analyze the culture in an organization. So there are 6 parts to the cultural web, and then in the middle is something what was called the paradigm. So the paradigm is the kind of collective view based on the 6 things that are happening outside the paradigm. So it's a kind of collective beliefs within the organization. So probably best to look at the 6. So the paradigm sits in the middle, which is the kind of collective view which influences, but the paradigm is influenced by these 6 areas: routines and rituals, symbols and titles, power and relationships, myths and stories, control systems, and organizational structure. So if you are assessing the culture of an organization in an SBL case study, for example, you would therefore use these 6 headings as a framework, and then you'd have to find some evidence from the case study across these 6 headings. Because ultimately, if you get the evidence across the 6 headings, that will give you an overall feel what the paradigm, what the overall culture is like in that organization. So if we look at the elements in a little bit more detail, power and relationships is who are the people in the organization with the greatest influence. So that ordinarily you may think is the board of directors or the senior team within the organization, and in many companies it probably is, but it could also be other people as well. So for example, in a airline, for example, pilots who fly their planes are not running the company, but they are a very powerful group within that company. And so that kind of although they're just an employee, as it were, not a director, they do have influence. So it's about finding who are the people with the power and relationships, key relationships within the organization. Myths and stories. So this is about past events and people who are still spoken about. So you might refer to maybe the founders, or maybe certain individuals within the company, maybe a salesperson that particularly was successful in the past, or a technology person who developed a new system. So these are stories. Now, some of these stories may be very true and accurate, but actually some of them might not be as well. So it's about what do people talk about within the organization. Control systems. So what gets measured and rewarded in an organization? So again, that's kind of important. So it could be customer service. So customer service might be really, really important and therefore very highly measured and also recognized and rewarded based on that. Or it could be we're all about sales volume, so we just want to drive sales at the top. Or is it profits? Or is it new product development? What are the things that are really important and therefore the things that get measured and rewarded in the organization? The structure. So the way the organization is structured, both formally and unofficially as well, or informally. So again, we mentioned before, structured about kind of, is it hierarchical? Is it a flat structure? These are the things that will influence. And again, it implies there that sometimes you can have a formal structure, but there can be some informal ways of operating. Again, this will be based on some evidence to help you think about this. Routines and rituals. So what are the daily behaviors or weekly or monthly behaviors and actions that have become the norm in the organization? So again, that could be certain things happen in certain ways. It might be on a Monday we do something, or on a Friday after work we do something, or a Wednesday lunchtime we do something. Trying to and what's the implication of what those routines and rituals are. And then finally, symbols and titles. So this will be anything visually representing the organization. So it might be the brand or the logo. It might be how people dress. So do they dress in a uniform? Do they dress formally? Do they dress informally? That is all part of this kind of culture. The office layouts. Do you have lots of single, closed offices, or is it open plan offices? Is it very formal or informal in terms of that? So again, what we're trying to do with these 6 headings is try to get evidence which then enables us to come up with this overall assessment of the culture, which with the cultural web will be captured by the paradigm. The impact of culture on purpose and strategy. So culture obviously in theory represents the values and beliefs that are shared within the organization, which again, that's part of the assessment. Strategy is looking at the long-term direction of an organization. So something we'll spend a lot of time on SBL in future lessons. What we're saying here, I suppose, is that culture should be aligned with the strategy. So the culture signals to employees what is valued by the organization, and this should align with the strategic direction and purpose. So if you've got a strategy or a future direction of the firm that you want to be the market leader, you want to develop new products, and you want to be seen as the most innovative company in the market, well, then your culture needs to support that strategy. So it needs to be then a culture that is very much thinking about growth, looking at new ways of operating, looking at innovation. So if your culture does not support that strategy will never be achieved. So this is the impact culture can have on the purpose and strategy of the organization. So it kind of says that there, if the organization strategy is to produce the highest quality products, the culture should reflect this with high quality production etc.